Ever sat there and like, I don't know, thought about what it would be like to, be sitting across from a dictator, like someone who had the fate of millions in their hands.
Yeah.
It's kind of a crazy thought, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And that's kind of what we're doing today in this deep dive. We're going right to the heart of such a moment.
Yeah, we're going to be dissecting a really remarkable primary source.
A letter written by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain to his sister, Ida, describing his first encounter with Adolf Hitler back in 1938.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So 1938, Europe is on the brink.
Right.
I mean, Hitler is he's emboldened by recent successes. He's set his sights on the Sudetenland, which is a region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population. You can feel the tension, right? Like just
Yeah.
reading Chamberlain's words, as he recounts his journey to Hitler's mountain retreat, the Berghof, sometimes called the Eagle's Nest.
Right.
And this wasn't just a diplomatic visit, right? This was like a desperate attempt to avert a catastrophic war.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating about this letter is the details that Chamberlain captures. He describes Hitler's appearance, even his clothes, surprisingly simple, almost ill-fitting, actually.
Yeah.
And you get a sense of Chamberlain trying to reconcile the man in front of him with this terrifying image that Hitler had cultivated, across Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's trying to square that, what he sees in front of him with what he knows about him as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And he even, I was reading, he even mentions Hitler's pale blue eyes.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's trying to find some humanity, right, in the gaze of a man who is quickly becoming one of the most dangerous figures in the world.
Right.
It's kind of a reminder that even in these like world-altering events, it's individuals, right, with their own perceptions and biases that are making these decisions that affect all of us.
And that's where the historians we'll be hearing from really come in, right? They help us to understand the context, the pressures that Chamberlain was under, and how those might have colored his judgment.
Right. So it's not just taking it at face value. We're going to look at it with a critical eye.
Exactly, yeah. Because you see, Chamberlain came away from that meeting at the Berghof feeling surprisingly confident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he believed he could reason with Hitler, that Hitler's goals were limited to the Sudetenland.
Really? So he walked away thinking, okay, I got this. Like I can handle this.
Almost as if, having met Hitler face to face, he was convinced of his own ability to control the situation,
Yeah.
find a peaceful resolution.
But the historians are saying that maybe that was a little naive.
Yeah, that's one of the critical questions that they raise. Was Chamberlain simply naive, or was this a calculated attempt to buy time, for Britain to rearm, knowing that war might be inevitable? And these are questions that continue to be debated even to this day.
Right. And it's not just about Chamberlain and Hitler in this whole drama, right?
Right.
There are other players here. There are forces working behind the scenes that add a whole nother layer of complexity to this story.
Absolutely.
So we've got so who are some of these other players?
Well, you've got Hermann Goering,
Okay.
one of Hitler's top lieutenants, of course. But he was also very apprehensive about the prospect of a war with Britain.
Okay, so even within the Nazi regime, there wasn't like 100% agreement on how to move forward.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
There were these conflicting opinions and internal power struggles going on.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Goering actually worked behind the scenes to try to moderate Hitler's demands, to try to prevent this wider conflict. He really feared the consequences of a war that he thought Germany might not be able to win.
Okay, so he's thinking strategically about this.
Wow.
Okay, so that's Goering. Who else?
And then you've got Benito Mussolini,
Oh,
this larger than life Italian dictator, and he actually steps in as a translator and mediator. And you can just imagine these three, larger than life figures
oh yeah.
all trying to navigate this incredibly tense situation, with the fate of Europe hanging in the balance.
It's like a movie. It's unbelievable.
It is. It's a scene straight out of a history thriller,
Right.
but with real world consequences, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That would soon be felt across the globe, and it sets the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold at the infamous Munich conference.
Okay, so we're kind of setting the table here for the Munich conference, but before we dive into that, I think we need to consider another perspective. one that's often overlooked in these, grand narratives of diplomacy and war.
Hmm.
And that's the perspective of the Czechs themselves.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
these people are facing a terrifying dilemma, right? They're being pressured to give up a part of their country,
Yeah.
to appease Hitler, to prevent a war that they didn't want. I
Oh.
mean, can you imagine that? Having your fate decided by powerful nations, feeling betrayed and abandoned by those who are supposed to be your allies.
Right.
It's a tough situation to even imagine being in.
It's a stark reminder that even in the pursuit of peace, there are often sacrifices made, and those sacrifices can have profound and lasting consequences.
And so it raises some crucial questions, and I think that's what we're going to get into in part two of our deep dive. Could Czechoslovakia have resisted? Were there other options available to them? And what was the true human cost of these desperate attempts to avoid war?
Exactly.
So we left off with the Czechs, right? Like facing this impossible choice, their fate hanging in the balance. It's September of 1938, and the world is holding its breath as Chamberlain, Hitler, and Mussolini, I mean, wow, gather for what would become known as the Munich Conference.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is that, Chamberlain's going in hoping for some kind of negotiated settlement, but, Hitler's actually already preparing for war.
Really?
Yeah, in fact, he'd secretly set a deadline for the invasion of Czechoslovakia, even as he's like shaking hands, posing for pictures with the other leaders.
Oh, wow. It's like a double game he's playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like something out of a spy novel,
Right.
All
That-
these secret plans and deadlines unfolding, beneath this veneer of diplomacy.
Right.
And this really it emphasizes Hitler's strategic cunning. He understood the power of propaganda, the importance of appearing reasonable, even as he's, orchestrating aggression.
So he's playing the media.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chamberlain, he sees the Munich Agreement as a triumph of diplomacy. He called
Yeah.
it peace for our time,
Yeah.
right? But Hitler sees it as a sign of weakness. Like, okay, these guys will back down.
Confirmation that the Western powers would, ultimately back down rather than risk war.
Wow. So they both walk away with completely different ideas about what just happened.
And in a way, they were both right. Chamberlain did manage to avert war in the short term, but he also emboldened Hitler and really set in motion the chain of events that would lead to World War II just a year later.
It's almost like the thing he tried to avoid, he caused by trying to avoid it. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is, yeah. It's a tragic irony. A well-intentioned effort to avoid conflict actually, paved the way for this much greater catastrophe.
Yeah. And what about Czechoslovakia? What happens to them in all of this?
Yeah, the impact on Czechoslovakia was devastating. They lost a significant portion of their territory. They lost their industrial heartland, vital defenses. Thousands of Czechs fled the Sudetenland, fearing persecution under Nazi rule.
So even in avoiding the war,
Yeah.
they still lost so much.
Absolutely. It's just a stark reminder that these grand geopolitical maneuvers always have human consequences. Real people whose lives are uprooted and forever altered.
Right. And it wasn't just Czechoslovakia that felt the impact of this.
Right. It really went far beyond Czechoslovakia. The Munich Agreement sent a clear message to other, ambitious dictators that that the democracies were weak, divided, unwilling to fight.
So it's almost like it gave a green light.
Exactly. It's like the balance of power shifted overnight. It emboldened aggressors.
Yeah.
And it really undermined those who were trying to maintain peace and stability.
Yeah, because if the big guys, the big powers aren't going to stand up, then what chance do the little guys have?
Thanks.
Right. It kind of makes you wonder, like, was there any hope? Was there any kind of resistance to Hitler within Germany itself? Like, were there people trying to stop him?
Yeah, there was. There was a group of military officers and officials who had actually been plotting to overthrow Hitler. They believed that, he was leading Germany to ruin.
So there was some hope that he could be stopped internally.
There was hope, yeah, that even within the Nazi regime, there were those who recognized the danger that Hitler posed.
Right.
But when Chamberlain appeased Hitler at Munich, these resistors, they lost hope.
Oh, wow. So it had the opposite effect.
It did.
Yeah.
Because they saw that that even, the leader of a powerful nation like Britain wasn't willing to stand up to Hitler. So what chance did they have?
So in a way, Chamberlain trying to prevent war, he might have actually strengthened Hitler's grip on power.
Yeah.
And kind of made the eventual conflict, even more likely.
That's one way to look at it. It's a complex and tragic irony. And it raises a question that historians continue to debate, right? Could things have gone differently? What if Czechoslovakia had resisted? Or if Britain and France had taken a firmer stance earlier on?
Right. It's the what if questions that always, keep you up at night. But it's also like, how can you ever know for sure?
Yeah, you can't go back in time, but by exploring them, right? But really getting into the complexities of how those decisions were made, we can maybe get a deeper understanding of the forces that shaped this pivotal moment in history.
Right. So looking back and analyzing it can help us understand maybe how we move forward today. But before we get to those parallels, I think we need to examine the aftermath of Munich, right? The fallout from this fateful agreement. So the Munich agreement, it buys a little time, but it's a fragile peace.
Yeah.
At best, right?
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, as we know, Hitler doesn't exactly, sit back and relax. The agreement was a victory for him, not just, in terms of territory gained, but in terms of the message it sent.
You're saying it emboldened him even further.
Exactly. He saw the Western powers' reluctance to fight, their willingness to compromise, as a sign of weakness, and he was determined to exploit that weakness to the fullest.
Wow. So the world is watching, holding its breath, wondering what Hitler's going to do next.
And it doesn't take long for the answer to become, terrifyingly clear. Less than a year after Munich, Hitler sets his sights on Poland, making demands that he knows will be unacceptable to the Poles and their allies.
So it's a deliberate provocation. He's calling their bluff.
Exactly. He's betting that they'll choose appeasement over war again, and tragically, he's proven right.
Right.
Yeah.
This time, though, Britain and France, they do declare war. Yeah. Right. They finally realize that Hitler, you can't contain him through negotiations.
Right. But it's a delayed reaction. Yeah. It's a response to aggression rather than a proactive defensive principles. And that delay, that gives Hitler a crucial advantage, allowing him to consolidate his gains and prepare for the conflict that's to come.
So the attempt to avoid the war at Munich, actually, you could say, contributes to its eventual outbreak, making it even worse when it does finally happen.
It's a sobering lesson in the dangers of appeasement, the complexities of international relations, the importance of recognizing threats before they escalate out of control.
And it makes you think about these figures. Historically, Chamberlain, he goes to Munich, he wants peace, but his actions actually end up helping to pave the way for war. And then Hitler, he gets what he wants in the short term, but ultimately it brings about his own downfall and the destruction of his regime.
It's a stark reminder that history is rarely black and white, that intentions and outcomes can often be at odds with each other.
So it's really complicated. And what about, we've talked about Chamberlain, we've talked about Hitler, but what about the Czechs? The people at the heart of all this.
Yeah, their experience is a tragic reminder of the human cost of these conflicts. They were betrayed by their allies, forced to give up their territory, and ultimately swallowed up by the Nazi war machine.
Yeah, we can't forget about them and what they went through.
Yeah.
And their story is a reminder that even in trying to achieve peace, there are sacrifices made. And those sacrifices have long-lasting consequences.
And those consequences continue to shape our world today, right? The Munich Agreement, it's a case study in the challenges of dealing with aggressive dictators, the importance of standing up for democratic values, and the need for clear-eyed assessments of threats and intentions.
Right, and it makes you think, about diplomacy, about the balance of power, about the responsibility that nations have to protect the vulnerable.
Yeah, and these are questions that are still relevant in the 21st century as we face these new challenges to the international order and principles of self-determination.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the Munich Agreement, I think the big takeaway is that history is not just about, dates and events. It's about choices that people made with consequences that last through time.
And by understanding the past, right, by examining the decisions that were made, the paths not taken, we can maybe gain some valuable insights into the challenges that we face today.
Right. So learn from our mistakes,
Exactly.
and hopefully, use those insights to build a more peaceful, a more just world for future generations.
Well said. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, be sure to subscribe to our show for more thought-provoking analysis of fascinating topics.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.